Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy is one of the most polarizing quarterback prospects in this year's draft, but that means he could be a value for you in your dynasty leagues. All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Behind the Steel Curtain and Pro Football Focus. On today's show, we are discussing J.J. McCarthy, who is one of the hottest quarterback names out there. Right before we jumped on the show, Kate, I saw that his odds to be the number 4 pick on FanDuel have exponentially risen up. What did you see from J.J. McCarthy when you turned on the tape?
I have to say, Marcus, I was very pleasantly surprised with what I saw on tape, because I always start by first, looking at the analytics. I love the analytics. And if you guys are new to the show or if you're seasoned veterans, I love me some advanced stats. I love some advanced metrics. And I'm going to be honest, like JJ McCarthy's statistical and analytical profile generally kind of underwhelming in compared to some of the quarterbacks in this class. We have a lot of high-end prospects. So from a production standpoint, from an analytical standpoint, JJ McCarthy is just a little bit more underwhelming, especially considering we have a lot of top-tier players here. But I put on the tape and I actually found myself kind of liking JJ McCarthy. And I will say, I think for as much as you're going to take away from him, because, it was more of a pro style offense. This offense wasn't on his back here. But coming out of Michigan, he's a little bit of a smaller guy, right? Right around the 40th percentile for height, weight. But I think he's a pretty solid athlete. I think he's a pretty overall just clean prospect. And I think that, a lot of the things that made me kind of excited about him when I watched him on tape, I love his ability to throw all over the middle. I love the willingness to throw over the middle. He's not scared of tight window throws. And I love to see that kind of confidence and lack of hesitancy on those types of throws. I think as a decision maker overall, pretty sound in the 2023 season. He's relatively young. I think there's a lot to like about JJ McCarthy, but I will tell you my favorite aspect of his tape are the scrambles and seeing that kind of dynamic athleticism. He's a little bit slipperier in the tackles than I really expected seeing this guy on tape.
Yeah, he's a good athlete. And I think we're going to get to some comps at the end of the show, but a very common comp that you'll see with J.J. McCarthy is Alex Smith, because Alex Smith coming out of Utah was the same way, where you wouldn't think a guy that looks like this would be fast, but he is, and he can cover a lot of ground as a runner. So that's always been a really underrated part of his game. And I think from a fantasy and a dynasty value thing, this is why we're so intrigued by McCarthy, is because he does have a good arm. The size is average. It's not anything to write home about, but he's a good runner and is efficient. And we've just seen before how that can be really beneficial to fantasy and dynasty players. If you're watching with us on YouTube right now, you can see our graphic showing his strengths. Like I said, good arm. I don't think it's an elite, but it's certainly good enough for the NFL standards. He's an above average athlete and an above average runner. One of the things that I really admire about him, and I think one of the reasons why, Kate, you're seeing him rise up some of these rankings, and most people believe he's going to be a top 5 pick, is because he is so tough. He's willing to stand in pockets. He's willing to take hits, and throw the ball. He's not going to bail out of clean pockets the way that a Zach Wilson did out of BYU. And coaches just really appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons, on top of the athleticism, on top of the arm strength, that I do think he is going to, or why I think he's going to end up being a top 5 pick.
Yeah, I think, obviously Michigan, an offense that didn't ask him to necessarily put this team on his back. And I do think that that's a big part of, why we don't really see this statistical inflation from J.J. McCarthy in comparison to a lot of these other top prospects. I mean, Blake Corum took so much off of his plate. He didn't need to be the guy. So I do think that obviously opens up questions here at the next level. And maybe we can start with that as a potential weakness, though I don't necessarily know that we can call it a weakness just yet because it's more of an unknown. But he wasn't the focal point of Michigan's offense. What happens if you come out and he goes into a situation where he has to be the focal point? They don't have a good, he goes to an offensive situation where they have a strong balance between the run game and the pass game. Obviously, that's going to translate really well. But if he goes into a situation like I'm thinking of, like Justin Herbert, where I feel like immediately Justin Herbert stepped into the Chargers offense and was asked to just shoulder that entire team top to bottom.
Yep.
I don't know that we're going to have a great idea of how he would handle that at the next level.
No, you mentioned how he didn't have to carry his offense. In fact, I don't want to say he was carried by the players around him, but there were several games this year, Kate, where he just didn't have to do a lot. Like, I love watching these big games. So, I circled the Penn State game earlier this year. These were, 2 of the top 10 ranked teams in the country at the time. J.J. McCarthy had 8 attempts in that game. 8 passing attempts. You look at the Ohio State game that they won late in the year, 20 passing attempts. It's better, not a lot. Even the national championship game against Washington, 18 attempts. You and I are lucky enough to have a subscription to PFF Ultimate. When I go back and watch these players, Kate, what I like to do is look at all of their third and long throws, and then I want to see all of their throws in the fourth quarter, when the game is tight. How many passing attempts do you think J.J. McCarthy had this year in the fourth quarter? Just give me a random number.
Oh God. I really don't know. I'm going to 100. No.
34 passing attempts in the fourth quarter this season.
And to be fair, actually, that's probably, I don't know why I would have said 100. So he's never had more than 330 something pass attempts in a season. So yeah, presumably you wouldn't have, unless things are going abysmally wrong in the first 3 quarters, you're probably not going to have 100 of them in the fourth.
Okay, get this. He had 110 second half passes all season long.
That is probably even crazier than the fourth quarter.
Caleb Williams alone had more passes in the third quarter than what J.J. McCarthy had in the second half combined. And this is what it's so hard about this projection is you see the traits, you see him be athletic, you see him make really good throws, but Michigan just didn't need him to be the guy. And that doesn't mean that he can't be the guy that carries his team. We just literally never saw it. So it's a lot of projection here.
It is a lot of projection. It's a lot of trait-based projections, but I do really like the traits, Marcus. I mean, so we've seen him now two seasons as a starter at Michigan. We saw a lot of improvement from his sophomore to his junior season, which you love to see. I saw increases in completion percentage, yards per attempt, air yards per attempt. Not a huge jump in touchdown production, but again, when you have Blake Corum carrying this offense, wasn't a huge need.
You don't need him. No,
you don't need him. And even the rushing stats, Marcus, I think are kind of almost deceiving. You see in his final season here at Michigan, averaged 3.2 yards per carry. And I got to be honest, watching him run and seeing that yards per attempt average was almost startling for me, because I do think he's sneakily creative as a scrambler. He is a solid athlete. His 32% missed forced tackle rate on rush attempts, Marcus, that ranked I think six among Power 5 quarterbacks.
Yeah, he's very good at He's a
Like,
really good runner.
he's
Yes.
sneaky.
Yeah,
Sneaky.
I was ready for you to say sneaky athletic, and it's fine.
No,
Uh,
he's sneaky.
yeah,
I'm just saying, like, I think, like, beyond athletic, I think he's much more elusive than you would ever guess. Just looking at that coy little smile, winning the national championship, you would never guess that. I do think he's a little slippery. Like, that
yeah,
slippery is the word that came when I was watching McCarthy. And when you combine the traits, I just think he, like, was overall a pretty clean quarterback prospect, with, the biggest kind of question marks being like, well, he wasn't asked to do this. It's it's hard to put those points against him. And we're
yeah.
talking fantasy here. So yeah, the athleticism, I'm gonna give him like double check marks for that.
All right, let's do some more analytic research when it comes to JJ McCarthy because the numbers are okay. They're not as good as like Caleb Williams or Bo Nix or Jaden Daniels, who we've covered in the previous episodes, but not bad either. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fastest and the easiest way to buy tickets for all of the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All in prices show your total upfront so you know that you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Be the first to get local insights from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, Kate, let's dive into the numbers a little bit more. What did you find when you looked at JJ McCarthy from an analytic standpoint?
I think I already used this word to describe him, but generally speaking, Marcus, in comparison to all of the quarterbacks that we've reviewed here, JJ McCarthy generally kind of overwhelming in terms of his advanced statistical profile. Looking at his 2023 grade percentiles from PFF, you know, he was fine. 50th percentile or above in all metrics, including clean pocket grade, no play action grade, first and second down, third and fourth down. You love to see the third and fourth down, especially Marcus, because you mentioned obviously liking to go back and see what are these quarterbacks doing in these key situations, maybe in the fourth quarter. I think probably his performance on third and fourth down is the closest you're going to get to
Mhm.
seeing what this guy can really do under pressure in these kinds of situations. And 93rd percentile PFF grade on third and fourth down, 79th percentile at or beyond the sticks. And I mean, generally speaking, you look at most of these metrics, Marcus, and whether it be adjusted completion percentage, which he ranked fourth among 165 qualifying quarterbacks. Big time throw rate was above average, turnover worthy play rate below average pressure to sack rate, which we've mentioned a million times. If you guys haven't been listening to our other prospect evals, has been a big problem for the top prospects here in this class. Like, generally speaking, he's not wowing you in any of these statistical metrics, but I also don't think there are any big or major red flags in his analytical profile that concern me.
No, to me, it just comes down to the sample size that we have with him when it comes like when he's down in games. Again, it's really strange, but 27 passing attempts in his career when they were losing. 27.
That's absurd. That is
Yeah.
absurd.
So it's really hard to. One of the ways that we can tell if a quarterback is good is how they handle chaos, right? Like when they're down in games and the pressure's on, can they basically be the calm in the sea, right? I have no
I don't
idea
know.
whether I have no idea. Again, I don't know that he can't do it. I also don't know if I mean, it's crazy. I got another one. I always like to see how a quarterback performs in the red zone. Okay. Like, cause it's a big deal, right? Like, if it's first and goal from the 8-yard line, how well do you perform? 9 career passes in first and goal situations. 9.
That
4
is
touchdowns, 4 touchdowns,
wow.
2 interceptions.
That is striking. I mean, that like again, it's so hard because it is such a small sample size. I mean, anybody with a statistical background is probably going to say like it's such a small sample size. It's insignificant, but you also can't ignore the data. So it's very hard. But all in all, like what is actually on the stat sheet? Nothing's scaring me off, but I will say, Marcus, I do think that the tape better complements J.J.
Yes.
McCarthy than the stat sheet does by a mile.
I agree. A couple other things that I wanted to mention that are positives for JJ McCarthy because I'm sure people listening to this podcast right now are like, "Oh man, Marcus, you're such a hater."
I know, I
Third,
actually feel like I'm the positive
I
one
know.
for once.
All right, here we go. 3rd and 8 through 10, right? So these are big money downs in the NFL. How many yards per attempt do you average when it's 3rd and 8 to 3rd and 10? For JJ McCarthy's career, 11.2 yards per attempt.
That's first down.
He crushes it on 3rd and long. You look at 3rd and 11 or sorry, 3rd and 11 or more, 9.3 yards per attempt. Still not bad, not a ton of attempts there. 3rd and 7 or 3rd and 3 to 3rd and 7 averages 7.7 yards per attempt, no interceptions in his career. So again, I know the sample size is really small, but for the most part, when the Wolverines asked JJ McCarthy to be the guy and convert on 3rd and long, he did. But I understand why a lot of people might be really down on him because of the limited sample size.
It is interesting though, Marcus, because like in this pre-draft process right now, JJ McCarthy is somebody that in the draft community is, I feel like, pretty rapidly climbing up draft boards. And I think it's a lot to do with, the buzz that they're hearing among the front offices within the league. And that hasn't necessarily matched the public perception. And I do think it goes back to the trait discussion because I do think JJ McCarthy, he checks a lot of these boxes for trait. And it's also really hard to knock somebody on, not having had the opportunity to showcase a skill set. Like it's hard to take that away from him. So I think you have to really limit the question marks of that sample size, look at the traits. And I do think the traits are telling me JJ McCarthy in the right situation. There are a couple
Yes.
quarterbacks in this class that could land anywhere and land on their feet. JJ McCarthy in a balanced offense, I think could be a solid, top 15 QB and maybe with a little upside on a week to week basis.
And I'm pretty bullish that he's going to land in a good situation. I want to talk about some potential fits for him, some player comps, and what his current dynasty value looks like when we get back. This episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar that you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of your first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, on tomorrow's show, it's a Wednesday, so of course that means Matt Williamson. We're going to be answering your Twitter questions, so make sure you tune in for that. We're also going to be breaking down Michael Penix on Thursday, kind of finishing up this quarterback series that we're doing, so make sure you check out that. But let's wrap up J.J. McCarthy here. Who do you got for a player comp, and where do you want to see him land?
I'm going to be honest. McCarthy, it is not a guy that I had a player comp come right out of the bat. There have been some really interesting historical comps. And Marcus, you have a comp that I would love for you to share with our audience, because I think it's one that might scare the general population a little bit, but I want you to tell us why we shouldn't panic about your player comp.
So we mentioned Alex Smith at the top. I actually think that's a pretty likely comp for him because coming out of Utah, Alex Smith was a highly efficient quarterback who also could do a lot with his legs. Didn't wind up in the best situation early in his career, but turned it around, had a nice, really long career. I think the better comp, though, is Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones was the 6th pick in the 2019 draft. I think had a lot of the same traits that J.J. McCarthy had, where really tough, will stand in the pocket, will take a hit. He has a good arm, but not a great arm. He's a much, much better athlete than anybody anticipated. I just don't think that the Giants did a good job of surrounding him with talent at all. Now, maybe Daniel Jones was never the player that should have been a top 6 pick, but in terms of play style, I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, I will say, Kate, one of the reasons why I'm definitely more bullish on J.J. McCarthy than I was Daniel Jones is because of the landing spot. I think, as of right now, it's March 19th. I think that J.J. McCarthy is going to end up with the Vikings, and I think that's a great landing spot with Kevin O'Connell running the offense. You're throwing to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, T.J. Hawkinson. You've got a good offensive line. They can run the ball a little bit. They can use his athleticism. I think that's a really good spot. And could you get Kirk Cousins level production in that offense eventually? I could see it. I'm kind of in if he lands with the Vikings.
I think the Vikings would probably be the landing spot. If I could send him anywhere for the sake of fantasy value, it's definitely going to be the Minnesota Vikings for all of the reasons that you mentioned. But I do want to also mention the addition of Aaron Jones, which I do think would, like on its face, like Aaron Jones is going to be good for an NFL offense. But I do think the addition of Aaron Jones in particular can add an element of efficiency that the Vikings have been missing in their run game, which I think will add a much more balanced element to this offense. Obviously, like this offense is generally funneled in terms of like necessity out of the pass. And I do think that Aaron Jones is definitely going to be the kind of element that adds that element of balance that, JJ McCarthy probably needs to succeed at the next level. And yeah, if he's catching passes from Justin Jefferson, from Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson when healthy, there's a lot of upside there, Marcus. And I think he comes into that situation probably looking at the day one starter. I'm not saying Sam Darnold's, I'm not saying Sam Darnold's out to not compete. I'm sure he thinks he's there to compete, but I do think that there's a significant chance that JJ McCarthy could come into this offense and make a year one impact at like a high upside QB2. Like, does that feel fair for the level of athleticism if he's surrounded by those types of weapons?
Absolutely. And I wanted to mention his dynasty value right now. He's being drafted as QB 22 in Superflex leagues. One spot behind Kirk Cousins, who he might end up replacing in Minnesota, one spot ahead of Matthew Stafford. So I actually like the price tag at QB 22 because I do think there's some upside there with his rushing potential. Could he average 25 to 30 rushing yards a game, maybe get you 5 or 6 rushing touchdowns. Absolutely. So landing spot's going to be really important, because if he ends up going to New England at 3 and they take him over Drake May, which I wouldn't advise any team doing, I'm going to be way out. I think of all these quarterbacks, he's probably the one that does make me the most nervous.
I think that's fair. I'm probably a little the most tepid on Bo Nix right now. I think he's going to be one of these guys that, like, JJ McCarthy, I definitely think in terms of fantasy upside is going to definitely, we're going to be looking at landing spot really closely here. But Bo Nix, especially considering, there's I think a very realistic chance he's not starting year one. Like, Bo Nix is the guy that I'm more shaky on than anything. But
Yeah.
I will say, Marcus, to close out the show, I was pleasantly surprised with my evaluation of JJ McCarthy. And I do think there's probably more fantasy upside here than you would believe at face value.
Last question for you before we go. Do you believe that JJ McCarthy should be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, not your dynasty draft, but in the actual NFL draft? Like, is he worthy of a top 10 selection?
I think if you have faith in your front office for developing a quarterback, yes. And I'm going to say that requires a little bit of self-scouting, but there are certain teams that we've just seen be unable to foster young talent at the quarterback position, because JJ McCarthy is not coming in as a done deal, right? I
No.
still think there's a lot of growth. There are a lot of question marks in terms of making sure he can adapt at the next level in those key situations. If you have an up and coming, a talented offensive mind, I'm going to say shoot your shot and bet on the traits. If not, I feel like you should pass. Like, if
Yeah,
you're not
I get it.
a team that's going to be able to develop the quarterback position, I'm not going to trust you with JJ McCarthy.
I want him to go to a team that has some of these teams don't need a quarterback or don't have the pick to draft him, but like a Sean McVay, a Kyle Shanahan, a
Mhm.
Kevin O'Connell, like a Bobby
That's
Slow, like
every quarterback's dream.
right. But I feel like more so than anyone, he is not the type of quarterback that I think you put with a defensive minded head coach and be like, okay,
Mhm.
he's ready to go. But like, I think Caleb Williams can go to Chicago and he'll be fine. Like, I really don't worry about his fit with Matt Eberflus. I would worry about McCarthy going to that type of head coach. So we'll see how it all shakes out. It does seem like it's trending in the direction of JJ McCarthy being a top 5 pick. And if he is, that's instantly going to raise his dynasty value. So maybe that now is the time to get in on JJ McCarthy before the price rises. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.